2015, Anthony Ray Hinton was released from prison after spending 30 years on death row for crimes he did not commit. 18 years after being sentenced, a group called EJI, or the Equal Justice Initiative, found the evidence needed to prove his innocence. However, it still took 12 more years for him to finally be set free. But without a doubt, Hinton's case was an uphill battle from the start. Even though he refused to admit guilt for 2 murders that he did not commit, he was convicted based on evidence and witness testimony that were unreliable at best. And here's just a few examples. A witness picked Hinton out from a lineup even though he had an airtight alibi. He was 15 miles away working in a locked factory. It would have been impossible for him to have been anywhere near the scene of the crime. It also came out that the original ballistics report was completely fabricated in order to make Hinton look guilty. Top ballistic experts ultimately testified that the gun tied to Hinton couldn't possibly have been the one used in the murders. Plain and simple, the justice system failed Hinton in every possible way. And when we hear the phrase, justice was served, we might immediately think it means someone got the punishment they deserved. But that only captures half of the meaning. You see, at its core, justice is really about making things right. For Hinton, justice wasn't served when he was sentenced. It was served when he was finally set free 30 years later. During those 30 years, Hinton probably felt trapped, forgotten, and abandoned by the legal system that should have protected him and by the people who believed he was guilty. You might even have described Hinton's case as a lost cause, but thankfully, not everyone thought so. His family stood by him, and the Equal Justice Initiative fought hard for him. And some of you may have heard EJI from the movie Just Mercy, which tells the story of Brian Stevenson on the right, the organization's founder. If you're wondering what motivates someone like Stevenson to fight so hard to bring justice to people who others might consider a lost cause, I can tell you that he is driven primarily by his faith in Jesus. His faith has fueled his mission to fight for the vulnerable and the forgotten. And as a result, EJI has saved the lives of over 130 people who have been wrongly convicted and sentenced to death. What I find most incredible about Stevenson is that he has the ability to look beyond the labels society places on people and chooses to see their humanity. His work reflects Jesus' heart for justice, which we'll see throughout the series is really about seeing people, meeting their needs, and working to make things right. One of my favorite things to notice in the Gospels is the way Jesus saw people. He didn't just glance at the surface. He looked beyond their mistakes and their imperfections to see their whole story. But that's not easy for us to do, right? Too often, we focus on other people's flaws and define them by their worst moments. For example, that kid who dropped their lunch tray last year in the lunchroom is clumsy, but he only happened to do that one time. Or the kid who does poorly on tests. We assume he's too lazy to study, even though the real reason is that he is exhausted from watching his younger siblings while their single mom picks up extra shifts at work. And if we're being honest, we are very judgmental people, are we not? And we judge others even though we hate it when they judge us. Now, if you're wondering how Jesus feels about this kind of thing, well, he makes his stance extremely clear, okay? Check out Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 5 with me. Do not judge others, and you will not be judged. For you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. And why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying to your friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye, when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite, first get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. Now, Jesus wasn't messing around. I think what I love most about this passage is how Jesus used hyperbole or exaggeration to make his point. Imagine what it would look like for someone to literally have a log stuck in their own eye, but the entire time they're complaining about a little speck or sliver in someone else's eye. Right? Yes, it's absurd, but that's exactly what Jesus wanted the crowd to understand. You can't help others if you are blind to your own issues. In this passage, Jesus showed us a deeper truth about how God's justice works. In verse 2, we see that we will ultimately be judged in the exact same way that we judge others. So if we judge others harshly or unfairly, it's very possible that we will also be judged in a harsh and unfair manner. But when we approach others with grace, we pave the way for grace in return. Now, again, that's easier said than done, but thankfully, Jesus didn't just teach about God's justice, he lived it out. An example of this is found in a series of powerful moments from Luke chapter 8. It's a story that shows us what it means to see and restore someone who has been written off as a lost cause. Luke chapter 8, and we'll start in verse 40. It says, on the other side of the lake, the crowds welcomed Jesus because they had been waiting for him. Then a man named Jairus, a leader of the local synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come home with him. His only daughter, who was about 12 years old, was dying. As Jesus went with him, he was surrounded by the crowds. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding, and she could find no cure. Coming up behind Jesus, she touched the fringe of his robe. Immediately, the bleeding stopped. Who touched me? Jesus asked. Everyone denied it, and Peter said, Master, this whole crowd is pressing up against you. But Jesus said, someone deliberately touched me, for I felt healing power go out from me. When the woman realized that she could not stay hidden, she began to tremble and fell to her knees in front of him. The whole crowd heard her explain why she had touched him and that she had been immediately healed. Daughter, he said to her, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. So there's a lot going on in these verses, and we'll come back to the guy whose daughter was dying in a moment. But first, I want us to consider the woman in the crowd. Her condition wasn't just physically challenging. It also made her what is called ceremonially unclean according to Jewish law. This means that she could not be a part of worship or even have normal social interaction. In fact, if we assume that she followed the laws strictly as was expected, there is a great chance that she hadn't experienced any human contact for 12 years. No hugs, no handshakes, no high fives, no fist bumps. For 12 years, she most likely lived in isolation, constantly feeling forgotten and ashamed. So when she reached out and she touched the fringe of Jesus' robe, she wasn't just looking to be healed physically. She was taking a huge risk. Touching anyone while being considered ceremonially unclean was absolutely unacceptable because doing so would cause the other person to become unclean too. However, this woman believed even the slightest touch, a momentary connection with Jesus, could change her life. Do we have belief like that? And that's exactly what happened. Jesus didn't just heal her body, he restored her dignity. When he called her daughter, he publicly affirmed her value and her faith in front of the whole crowd of people. But remember the guy whose daughter is sick? The story doesn't end there. Let's continue in verse 49. While he was still speaking to her, a messenger arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. He told him, "Your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now." But when Jesus heard what had happened, he said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just have faith, and she will be healed." When they arrived at the house, Jesus wouldn't let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, James, and the little girl's father and mother. The house was filled with people weeping and wailing, but he said, "Stop the weeping. She isn't dead, she's only asleep." But the crowd laughed at him because they all knew she had died. Then Jesus took her by the hand and said in a loud voice, "My child, get up." And at that moment, her life returned, and she immediately stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were overwhelmed, but Jesus insisted that they not tell anyone what had happened. So while Jesus was still talking with this woman who is just healed, some seriously bad news arrived. Jairus' daughter had died. And imagine how hopeless Jairus must have felt at that moment. But I love that Jesus still went to Jairus' house anyway. And did you notice how the people reacted when Jesus told the crowd that the little girl would soon wake up? And I can't imagine how Jairus and the girl's mother must have felt at that moment. In addition to the grief of their child dying, what they were experiencing suddenly, they were torn between the hope of Jesus' words and the embarrassment of everyone laughing in the crowd. And it must have been excruciating. But in the end, Jesus did what only Jesus can do. That day, Jairus witnessed 2 miracles. And they only happened because Jesus was willing to meet people in their desperation, loneliness, and fear. And while it might seem like this story is just about physical healing and resurrection, it's about so much more than that. This is a story about the restoration of life and dignity, even in the most hopeless situations. You see, wherever Jesus goes, he brings healing, hope, and restoration. This is a story about Jesus making things right. This is a story about justice. So what can we take away from this story? What are the big ideas that we need to make sure that we don't miss? Well, the first one I think is this. Justice isn't always convenient. I think about Jairus, desperate for Jesus to heal his dying daughter. Without a doubt, Jairus' need was urgent. But Jesus stopped on the way to help the woman in the crowd. Imagine what it must have been like for Jairus in that moment. Frustrated, anxious, panicked, probably even annoyed that Jesus stopped. Yet Jesus did not rush past the woman. He knew she needed healing, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. For Jesus, justice meant addressing the needs of others even when it was inconvenient. To be sure, he could have kept walking, but he chose to stop and restore this woman. He showed everyone, including us, that no one is too insignificant for his attention. He didn't do what was convenient or what everyone else wanted him to do. Instead, he took the time that was necessary to make things right in both situations. Following Jesus' example often means stepping out of our own schedules, priorities, and comfort zones to bring justice and care for others. The next thing that I want to make sure that we notice is this: lost causes deserve justice too. The woman in the story had been suffering for 12 long years. Some of you in this room aren't even 12 years old yet. And she had been suffering longer than you've been alive. Because her condition made her unclean, again, she had most likely become isolated and generally forgotten by the world around her. But when she reached out to Jesus, he didn't just heal her and move on. He called her out of the crowd, spoke to her directly, and called her daughter. Jesus made things right for this woman when others considered her a lost cause who was to be avoided at all costs. And when Jairus' daughter died, it seemed like all hope was lost. The messengers even told Jairus not to bother Jesus anymore. But Jesus had a different perspective. He didn't let a hopeless situation stop him from bringing life and healing to Jairus' family. Plain and simple, Jesus is strong enough to handle even the most hopeless situations. But do you believe that? This reminds me of a passage from the book of Romans where the Apostle Paul offers some encouragement. Romans chapter 8, verse 28 says, "And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose." Yes, even when things seem hopeless, even when we feel like a lost cause, Jesus is able to make things right. And I believe that he wants us to do the same. And that's justice. So what can we do to bring justice to people and situations in our world that others might consider a lost cause? I think one of the first things that we need to do is to slow down and see beyond the crowd. Jesus was able to help the woman in Luke chapter 8 because he slowed down and noticed her, even in the middle of all the chaos going on around him. Even though it was crowded and busy, he didn't rush or push people aside. Instead, he moved intentionally and created space for unexpected moments when healing and restoration could happen. But for Jesus, it wasn't just about slowing down. It was also about seeing the person that others overlooked. While the crowd focused on Jesus, he saw someone in need. And we live in a fast world packed with schedules and endless phone notifications, all fighting for our attention. But to truly see and respond to the needs around us, we need to intentionally slow down and look for those on the fringe, people who may feel forgotten, alone, or out of place. It might mean regularly scheduling time to set aside distractions and pay attention to people who often seem overlooked or feel left out. I want to challenge you to make it your goal to slow down and be present wherever you are. If you see someone alone, take a moment to help them feel seen and included. Whether it's at school, at practice, or here at youth group, be willing to step away from the crowd to bring someone else in. And I know it's easy to just stay focused on ourselves. And like I said earlier, we have a lot going on. But I want to share with you a short passage from the Apostle Paul that has been reminding people to slow down for almost 2,000 years. Philippians chapter 2, verse 4 says this: "Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too." If people needed to be reminded of this all the way back in the first century, how much more do we need to be reminded of this today? Slow down and create space for unexpected moments where you can demonstrate God's love to others, especially those who might think of themselves as a lost cause. And the second thing I think we all can do is to speak life into the overlooked. Our words have the power to build others up in a way that can't be overstated. One of the simplest ways that we can reflect Jesus' heart for justice is to speak kindly to someone who feels unseen or undervalued. Sometimes people just need to hear that they are noticed, appreciated, and loved. And sadly, it's often the people who need to hear things the most who are told them the least. And we can change that. A wise king named Solomon said this in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 24. Kind words are like honey, sweet to the soul, and healthy for the body. Think about the people around you. Your friends, family, classmates, or even someone you don't know well. Who might be going through a hard time? Who seems isolated or discouraged? Who might need words that are like honey? Make it a point to encourage at least one person each day. Send a thoughtful message. Give a genuine compliment. Or take a moment to listen to someone who just needs to talk. Remember, justice is in ways about punishing people who have done wrong. Sometimes it can be about bringing life and healing to those who have been overlooked or forgotten. Jesus came to bring justice for the lost cause. And I believe that we should follow his example.